when you have your headphones in and the thing comes on, it has this ding dong sound, and if your volume happens to be really high, it's loud in the headphones.
Wow, your sound is really funky for me. I think there may be like a 10-second delay going on.
Is this a little bit better?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I discovered this problem on my Mac laptop, which is that if I have an external monitor, a second external monitor plugged in, and the battery is discharged and it's charging at the same time, some background process goes absolutely crazy, and the load shoots up to 20, and everything is slowed down. And so the cure is not to have the external monitor plugged in when it's charging. But once it's charged, there's no problem. It's like this crazy problem to have. It was pretty frustrating before I figured out like the right combination of things to unplug and plug in to make that stop happening. But anyway, sorry. We should be better from now on.
Morning. Or should I say, excuse me, evening, yeah.
Gosh, it is very early where you are, huh?
Sorry? I didn't get it.
It's very early in the morning for you.
Yeah, but that's fine. I'm in college, I'm used to this.
Nice.
Is Dan joining?
Yeah, I think we're just waiting for Dan. So Janek, while we're waiting, maybe we'll just check in real quick and make sure everything I posted in the channel yesterday made sense, and also make sure you realize the timeline for next week, which is when the phase 1 evaluations are due.
Yep, I pretty much got all that, and I guess it's better that way because I was sort of hoping there was some procedure or set template so that I could possibly, have a uniform way of updating you guys rather than thinking of something every week and probably just confusing you with the way I wrote things. So yeah, phase 1 evaluations are coming up, and I have some updates. They're just, I wanted to create another pull request, but that's just something small. So I thought probably after I added something more this week, I'd probably create just one and make that a bigger one, I suppose. Other than that, yeah, I had like a few questions that already sort of, talked about in the Slack. And I have some, I guess after talking to Rob and a few other people, I have a better idea of a few of them, but I guess there's still a few questions that I have in mind. So probably this call should help with that. You're on mute, so I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Great. So yeah, I appreciate you requesting a call like this when you need it. Definitely don't be shy about letting us know when it's time to have a check-in. And I think having those weekly statuses posted as GitHub issues will definitely help keep us all on track. So you're online to do one of those tomorrow?
Absolutely. I think I have to probably do it today, given that it's already Friday for me. So yeah, I think it'll be done probably before 5, and I'll probably just update you in Slack once that's done.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And so you're aware that next week is the phase 1 eval, and I think you've got to fill out an eval as well during that time.
Yes, I am. I have gone through the pages
Hey.
and the, yeah, I've gone with. Hey.
Okay, great.
Oh, wait,
Evening.
hang on.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Cool.
Sorry to be the last one to the party. I was just talking to my brother.
No worries. I think we're actually all early.
Cool, cool.
So we were just going over some miscellaneous details and stuff, making sure that our new plan with the weekly statuses makes sense, and Janek is all set to do his eval next week. And sounds like we're all on the same page, which is awesome.
Awesome.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
So moving ahead on the issue that got assigned to me, Dan. So I guess on the page freezer end, I mean, you have already made a lot of functions available, and I think the documentation which they have also provided should help me get a, help me with the documentation on the metadata. So that is not an issue. On the IA end, I would say we probably have to, from the list of versions, probably hit the URLs, get the HTML back, and is that a way, or is the version, I mean, the list of versions should be considered as the original data? I mean, I'm not sure on that.
Yeah. Really, whatever you think is useful to document, we can document. What I had in mind was documenting what's different between the versions captured from different sources. And when you insert something into the versions table of the Web Monitoring DB database, the only column where you can put heterogeneous information is the column called source metadata, right? So every version, no matter where you get it from, you're going to get URL. That's where that version that we harvest would go. You're going to get a SHA-256 hash of the content that we can use to validate. And all the above. We know that for Versionista, you get this dictionary of random crap, which one of the links that Rob posted in that issue above where you chimed in, he points to an issue where there's a source metadata block for Versionista data, right? So that would be like an example of the kind of thing we would document, right? So then we would maybe do the same thing with Page Freezer. I don't know off the top of my head what extra content that would entail, probably the like IDs of the archive and the cabinet, right? For IA, I think it might honestly be an empty dictionary. I think there's nothing, because all we know is the URL of the snapshot and the timestamp. I don't think they give us anything else to store. So I guess I'm just saying everything they do give us already has a specific place, and there's nothing else to put in the miscellaneous category.
Yeah, that sounds, I mean, that makes sense, but probably maybe just check if there's something else we can probably get from Internet Archive, and if there is something that exists, probably put that there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen this, but I mean, I'm sure you have. This is in the documentation, or is it? Right. So, like when you go to the Page Freezer documentation, you go to I think they have a page. I don't remember the page number. What is this? Okay, I do not like Edge. So yeah, metadata page is a page and get a file, and that sort of gives a lot of info. So I think we can compare that against the Versionista dictionary. So yeah, that should not be an issue. Probably, I don't know if we should move on to talking about diffing, and I was hoping we could probably also talk to Rob about this, because he's the one primarily working on the database side. Right. I mean, from my point of view, obviously it does not make sense to sort of get all the data there is available, because it's, I mean, honestly, it's quite a bit, and then sort of, go for the diffing. But what I wanted to ask is, should I just consider a certain time period from which I should get the versions, or some other sort of criteria which I should have in mind to get that?
Right. So this is something Rob and I talked about a long time ago. And I came in kind of with the same idea that you're coming in with, which is the assumption that if you have analysts who are visiting the app and they want to look at diffs of versions, that it would be nice if those diffs had been pre-computed so that the load times of the diffs are relatively short. There's a couple layers of unanswered questions here. If the diff is like, so there's a lot of different diffs we could compute, right? In my PR, I put up a couple like really stupid, simple ones that compute in microseconds. The page freezer diffs take 6 to 12 seconds to compute through the public API. I don't know the answer to if you make a page freezer request from inside our Google Cloud deployment, which has some sort of privileged access to page freezer, whether that's any faster. Or if there's any way they can make it faster. So if suddenly we had access to like less than a second page freezer request responses, then I would say it's not even worth thinking about this problem, because there's a lot of diffs and we can't store them all. So let's just make them when we need them and throw them away, right? But if we have some different technologies, page freezer or potentially others that we make, that are expensive to compute, we don't want the analyst sitting in front of the monitor for 10 seconds waiting for the diff to load, right? So if we presume that that there are going to be some slow loading diffs, then we have to ask the question of like, combinatorically, we have to take the number of versions that exist, and like every version against every other version of a page is too many versions to store. So we need to develop some sort of cache that just stores the most important things. So I have some rough ideas about that, probably the same as you would come up with. Nothing that I've thought about too hard. But I think it would be useful to sort of chase that down. Are you aware of like the concept of a least recently used cache?
No, I don't think I've heard of that.
Okay, so that would be something to Google. Here, I'm putting it in the chat. Python 3 has an LRU cache, it's called, that you can pop on top of a function as a decorator that basically says cache the arguments every time someone calls this function, cache the arguments and whatever the return value is. And if someone calls it again and they pass in the exact same parameters, just hand them back the value that we already computed. And then you can set a limit on like how many of those it will remember. And so it'll keep the last 500 calls or something, and then it won't grow without bound. So that's one way you could do it, or you could do that plus trying to pre-compute diffs of things that people are likely to ask about. It could get more and more clever, but that's probably a place to start.
Okay. So I guess a good way for this to go is, obviously we want, I guess the right direction to go is to sort of have this already computed for the analyst to go through, so that obviously the time is not an issue for them. So what probably could come out of this whole project, you could say, is that for now what we do is sort of create a separate database, and because I mean we can probably have it running overnight, and time, you could say, is not an issue for us. So probably
yeah.
Through that, figure out a way how to filter out the important changes, and probably at least because I just remembered I was running one of the compare on some URLs yesterday and gave me a time of like 10 seconds or something. I was like, okay, that's just okay.
Yep.
However, I think because they have this certain diffs in the output of the compare, I mean the dictionary which we get back, so we can probably iterate through them and probably through some rule-based matching. I mean, as an initial step, try to figure out which ones are dates. Or because they while they do give us back the diffs. They don't really have a category as to what sort of diff it is, which I think at the back end they are computing in some way, because I mean, they're comparing and they're literally giving dates in a separate diff and other things like the HTML ones in a separate row, you could say. So I guess they know that this is a date part probably already. So if that could come back to us, that would help. Or otherwise, we'd probably have to create a custom sort of tag for that.
So you're talking about ways we could look at diffs in an automatic way in this sort of long-running background process and assign either a filter true false or some sort of priority to them, right?
Yeah, because I remember this is probably something we had discussed quite a while back, that dates and things like changing news feeds and all probably just don't count as important changes right away. So it's something we can filter out without even thinking about it.
Right.
Or going through them. So if that is something that PageTreezer has on there, and it's just, let's say, less time consuming and easier for us to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a couple aspects in that idea that can be worked on in parallel. So, you know, one thing that you're saying is generating the diffs ahead of time. And there's two reasons I guess you might do that. One, you could generate the diff ahead of time so that when the analyst wants to look at the diff, it's ready to go, right? Having all of the diffs they might want to see ready, I think, is not possible. Like combinatorically, there are too many. So something you said earlier, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Like, there will need to be a way that when the analyst asks for a diff, it's going to go down one of two paths, right? It's either going to generate it or it's going to have it. And through something like the LRU cache decorator or an equivalent thing, that will just sort of transparently happen. So the user will either see it's slow or it's fast, but either way, they're going to get their diff. Then I would say separately from that entirely, you have this other process that is also asking for diffs. It might also engage with that caching logic, you know, so it can take advantage of fast things when they're fast. And it's producing its own kind of annotation, right? And we talked about this in the first call, like it's kind of like analogous to what the human analysts are producing, but it will probably label it differently. And that process will chew through a whole lot of diffs, but probably more than we can store. So those diffs will get created when they're needed and then tossed away, I think.
Yeah. I mean, just to make sure we're on the same page here, what I was trying to say is before we push it into the UI for the analysts to use, we should probably just have sort of like a test case, so that what happens is we compute all possible diffs for a certain time period in the cache, and the important ones we put in the database, and then connected to the UI. I mean, that's something.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so we want to so you're talking about basically filtering of changes. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen for the first rollout that we present with the analysts, because their workflow is very focused on, I have signed up to look at these 100 web pages, and every 3 days I check these 100 web pages, and I get an indication of whether a given block of those changes are the same using that diff hash thing, right? But that's it. And I think we're probably not going to want to depart from that right away. So I would aim this at like providing information to the analysts about whether we think something is important or not, instead of like straight up filtering them. But maybe from your perspective, it's basically the same thing. Like instead of never generating the diffs, instead of like hiding the diffs from the analysts, we would just mark them as like red or green as sort of baby steps toward both asserting our confidence that our filtration is correct and also moving them toward this workflow where they don't look at the same 100 pages every day. We tell them what's important and we focus their attention on that. That's going to be like a cultural shift for the way that they think about what they're supposed to do. that we need to do probably gradually and not in the first launch of the app.
Okay. Okay. So what if right now, like I said, you're correct about not directly just giving it out to them in terms of filtering out all changes, like the ones which we're probably going to get through a learning model, you could say.
Right.
But the things which I'm pretty sure, I mean, we can just eliminate them without even a question, like the dates and probably a few other things. So those could we just, yeah, we could probably mark them as red, or give them a tag that this is a date change, so you probably don't need to go through it. Yeah, I mean that could work for first rollout, because that would be sort of a rule-based thing if in some way, and that shouldn't. I mean, we wouldn't be eliminating any important changes by mistake.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's right. So you'll need to create basically. Well, I don't have it in my head. So what would your thing that decides whether something is a trivial change or not take in as an input?
First, I'll probably have to, because right now I've just compared like 2 or 3 sets of URLs, so probably go through a few more to get a sense of what kind of changes I could get back. I guess I sort of have seen a pattern in at least the dates, so that filter for that can be created. At the same time, probably if we can get in touch with page trees and ask them how they're doing it, so if that helps us in some way if they can.
Right.
For the other things, I mean, I can't be sure right now, but if after looking and going through them, probably I can think of a way of checking if there's a pattern which repeats for those changes, or if there's a way that probably page trees are, for example, I haven't seen an example where a file is removed in the diffs. So if I see something like that, and there's a way they tell like, okay, file is here, and then it's just empty. So that's a way of checking that the file is gone. So yeah, those kind of rules for, kind of change.
I think you're right to follow it's going to be easier to find obviously trivial changes than to find obviously important changes, I would guess. So missing file, harder to spot than, banner ad has been rotated or date has been changed, but just the date, so it's fine. What I was trying to drive at a little bit is not necessarily the kinds of changes that your code would detect, but like if you were to implement it as a function, it would take in, for example, the raw text diff, or it would take in the diff JSON blob that page freezer returns back, right? So if it took that in, then it would maybe return as an output true or false or something like that. So if you could get even just write a function that takes in a string and decides whether the string it's looking at looks like a date, that would be a useful thing. I'm sure, I know there's code that does that sort of, but we want something that does that quite greedily, right? That's not very strict. I haven't seen that. So I guess does that seem like a good place to start?
That does seem like, I guess that is the majority of irrelevant changes in most cases, dates and likes. And probably, I remember mentioning this somewhere in my proposal. I had talked about categorizing the kind of changes. So I guess that sort of fits in there. So yeah, let's start with that. And I think, more than, it's probably after I look at a few cases and probably discuss with you guys, we might have a better picture of what's happening with the trivial changes, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I think I'm finally seeing a way to sort of build this up without getting lost in the plumbing. So if you can write like distinct functions whose only role is to say, does this look like a date? Yes or no. Does this look like a banner ad? Yes or no. And those separate things. And then those functions in turn get called by something higher up that says, let's see if this is a date or a banner ad or whatever, and then returns that labeling. Does that sound useful to you guys, Kyle and Mike?
That sounds really useful to me. I'm actually just looking over the issues we defined. It doesn't quite go with, so this is kind of the next issue on the docket. It almost seems like a bit of an intermediate step between issue 1 and this one.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. So in terms of like the deliverable for this, it might be honestly interesting once you've looked at some real examples to just generate a bunch of made up examples, like variations on a theme. I guess the machine learning people call this bootstrapping, and they have tools to do it. But you could just do it yourself, and at this point, I think that would unblock you a little bit, and make a lot of things that look like dates and a lot of things that don't, and use some of the PyTest patterns that you'll find in the IA tests that I wrote. If you can look up PyTest fixtures, just to send you down another rabbit hole, that's a way that you can parameterize tests in Python. You basically hand it like a list of test cases, and one function will automatically sort of loop through that list for you and generate n tests for the n entries in that list. So a PyTest fixture that loops through a ton of samples that may or may not look like dates and may or may not look like whatever other classifications you have in mind. That sounds like a week's worth of work to me.
Okay, so that sounds great. So probably, I guess the issue is already created, so we could add these things here. And yeah, I guess it'll be dated on that. So, okay, I'll just note that down again and think of this later. Okay, so other than that, this is probably something we discuss later. I mean, anything else aside? I'm sorry. Is there anything you guys want to tell me or discuss before I ask more questions?
But before we move on from that, let me make sure I understand. So I'm feeling like we might want a separate issue for this. It's really not quite the same thing. It's issue 48. Should we create something called something like creating a function that IDs page elements, or however we want to think about this?
Yeah, I think this is the first attempt at what people have been calling filters since January. And so filters are things that take in diffs, and a given change, which is 2 versions, can have many diffs. So like a page freezer diff, a plain text diff, etc. Filters take in 1 or more diffs and return true or false. Is this a date? Is this not? And then another layer on top of that, that's like some sort of classifier. Is that a useful way of thinking about this? As far as I know, no one has broken it down in this way yet.
Right. I mean, that sounds like what we're aiming towards, but it almost sounds like what we're talking about right now is more like a module within that IDs elements for filtration.
Yeah, it sounds like what you were describing is something that could take a page and sort of detect that this is a date, this is a banner ad. And it's unclear to me how it would communicate that information. Like, what would it, the output could be, I found a banner, let's say it's a banner ad. So I found a banner ad on the page, and then you also want to know, well, where on the page is it? So there's a couple of ways I can think of doing that, but they're all kind of grungy. So one way is to use XPath and to output like a path pattern that says this is where you would find it in the HTML of the page. Another way would be to do it visually. So if you have some way to render the page and then indicate a region in terms of a rectangle, let's say, because banner ads are usually square, so a rectangle on the page in terms of coordinates. Not sure which one of those would be useful. Maybe neither of those would be useful, but those are the things that come to mind when you describe labeling aspects of a page.
Right. So point taken that filtering is really not what we're talking about here for sure. This is
sort of pre-filtering. Like you would need to filter. You would
characterizing the page, right?
Yeah. Describing the page. Okay. Yeah. Characterizing.
Okay. So here's a general question for the room. I think the end result of this whole pipeline is an annotation that goes in alongside the human annotations. And if we think about this scaling to like Galaxy Zoo style many analysts are going to end up looking at the same page, perhaps untrusted analysts on the internet, right? So everything's sort of rated and gauged. When we decide what's the next most important thing for an analyst to look at, like someone logged in, we want to give them something to study. We're going to look at, have other people looked at this and said it was important or unimportant? And we're also going to look at, have any of our automated processes looked at this? So all the annotations from humans and from processes like these get lumped together into a decision that leads to a priority. Do these individual characterizations, like has a banner ad, doesn't have a banner ad, are they just annotations? Do we just throw them into this pot, into the web monitoring DB, or is this like a longer chain where we ID, yes, this has a banner ad, yes, this has a date, et cetera, and all this gets synthesized into a single annotation?
I think at least for some cases, it seems to me that at least in some cases, they would be part of a longer process. So take the example of a banner ad. You probably actually don't want to annotate a page that says there's a difference in a banner. And you don't want to do a diff that says there's a difference in the banner ads, because that's kind of likely to be irrelevant. However, you would want to know that there's a banner ad in order to filter or to ignore that as part of the diffing process. So if you can identify that something is a banner ad and there's a difference between two pages, you can say there's actually not a difference in the two pages if all that's different is the banner ads. And that would be a useful thing. But that's a process. So the labeling here seems to be a step in a process that makes a decision, but it's not the decision itself.
Right.
Okay. Adding to what Mike said earlier, sort of presenting it in a visual way, I remember seeing, I think it's on the UI repo, so the changes can be, the page freezer changes, the changes between the two URLs can be seen in a visual way, like green and the red. I can probably share that link with you guys. If you just give me a second.
I think I remember a diff view, and I can't remember if that was versionista or page freezer, but there was a different where there was like red in one side and green on the other. Is that the
exactly? I think that might be versionista. I mean, I don't remember. Anyway, so something like that. I mean, that's the sort of idea I wanted to go for. So probably what we could do is, so that talks about changes, right? That mentions that, okay, this was there earlier and this is what's here now. So adding to that, or probably, using a similar template, you could say what we could do is, okay, so this is looks like an not an important change, and we categorize it as, let's say, banner ad or date. And I mean, one way to go is probably get our annotations validated from the analysts, because they won't go wrong, would they? So I mean, that's what we hope for. So yeah, that's one way to sort of test if our pre-filtering is working out all right. I mean, that's the idea I had in mind.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think a useful thing to learn from this is, what kind of diff do you need for a given filtration? Like, going up in terms of complexity, like, do you just need to know whether something was added or deleted? Do you need to know, et cetera, et cetera? Do you need all the way up to page freezer or something potentially fancier than that? Or do you need to actually look at the page, right? You could say some kinds of pre-filtering might actually become a human-assisted process, separate from the annotation process.
Right. I mean, I think we all sort of agree that the human moving in parallel with the human annotations would be the right way to go, or I mean,
yeah,
I might be wrong there, but yeah, I guess, should we keep that as a, way to go in direction for now? Okay, so with that, probably add that. Is there a way to create? This is again a Git question, and probably should GitHub question actually, and I should use it more often to get used to it. So probably create subtasks somehow. I've worked with other boards before, but not a lot in GitHub. So is there a way to create subtasks for an issue or sub-issues for an issue?
If you do this thing that I just put into the chat, that makes a checkbox in Markdown. and you'll see sometimes like master issues that that have a checkbox and then a link to a different issue. So if you want to sort of organize yourself that way, you could do that, or you could use labels.
Or probably, yeah, labels and linking different issues. Yeah, that should work.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's it on the project end from my side. I had a few good questions, but probably hit down up later with them. Probably discuss that on Slack will be better. So yeah, that's probably I'll also update the issues from my side, from my perspective, and that should make sure that all of us are on the same page, so that there's no sort of confusion related to issues or goals in mind. And yeah, I'll be done before 5.
Cool.
Awesome, that sounds great. I'll go ahead and create this new issue and we can change it if we think as we go along it makes more sense to call it something else.
Great.
I had a question related to one of the labels. I mean, it is tagged there, but I think the label does not exist anymore. I think Matt probably removed it. I'm not sure. Okay, where is my issue? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm lost.
It's fine.
Too many tabs.
Too many repos.
Yeah. So, okay, here it is. Yeah, phase 1 evaluations does not seem to exist, I suppose. I mean, it's not there anyway, so we can probably add that back. The label phase 1 evaluations is not there. I mean, it's
there's
there.
a milestone for that though, right? That's how we tried to do that.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So the thing is, I hovered over the link and I just pressed on it, and that led me to the issues page, and it said no results matched. So I was like, okay, that's easy.
Oh, I see. Probably Matt. We were sort of like learning how to use GitHub in real time here. So the milestones are sort of like categories as opposed to tags. So a given issue can only belong to one milestone, and milestones have like a nominal date assigned to them. So we're using milestones for phases and labels for other stuff, because you can put multiple labels on an issue.
So speaking of that, I'm starting to feel like some of these that are ID'd as part of milestone 1 should probably be in milestone 2, since milestone 1 kind of ends next week. What do we think about that?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I guess the documentation thing should be done. That shouldn't be an issue by the end of next week. And I guess that does sync with my proposal. I just remember going to something. There were a lot of issues on the ETL pipeline earlier, and I don't think I can find them now. I'm not sure if they've been removed. Probably check with Dawn once. Does anyone have any idea about what happened to those issues, or have
the ETL pipeline issues?
Yep.
You said? I think they're still in web monitoring processing.
I thought they were in the DBS. Oh, okay.
No, I think they're in processing. So these were pulled over from a San Francisco event. Were either of you two there? Kai, you might have been there, right?
Yeah, I was one of the organizers there.
That's what I thought. You were you in the conversation where they made this? I think like they put something up on a whiteboard that was later translated to issues.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's a real 10,000-foot view of the process. These will probably each become sort of like checklist issues in themselves. But I think they're worth keeping around just to keep us remembering the ideas.
Yeah, I just took a quick look at, I'll put it into the chat. So it strikes me this is kind of very similar to what we were just talking about, or what you have done, Dan, with that other issue.
Mike, I think they just went to me. You might want to send it to everyone.
I didn't know that there was any way to do that. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that was a feature. I don't know how I even clicked on that.
Wait, issue 13?
Yeah, so I just noticed that the ingest is talking about diffs, bytes added, removed, context information. Some of that sounds like it's pretty similar to the Python thing you just did yesterday.
Right.
I'm only bringing this up that some of this looks like it could actually be merged with existing work, or else maybe there's a distinction and I don't understand it, and so maybe there's a.
No, I don't know. I think there's a lot of ideas here, right? Like what I've provided is a platform for writing, very simple 2 or 3 line functions that take in bytes and return a verdict. And so, I haven't yet implemented, for example, are there any new bytes in this? Are there any bytes deleted from this? And that is a pretty sophisticated procedure. Like if you think about how git diff works or something like that, there's a whole, language of heuristics for deciding when things are similar enough that they're probably the same thing and that kind of stuff. So I think this issue is worth sort of keeping around to draw inspiration from. But to your point, Mike, maybe we should link it to the diffing issue and to other issues to start to address parts of it.
So on this end, I just had one last question. So obviously we're trying to load it somewhere. So probably, do we need to talk to Rob about, are you aware of what sort of database, not what sort of, but which tool, which server we are going to use to sort of store it? And do we have some storage available already? Or do we have something in mind?
Let's see. So I think we're going to put the diffing server on the Google Cloud deployment because of its maybe, but again, not tested, privileged access to PageFreezer. So that was my plan. And basically the way to get new stuff onto that deployment is to get pull requests into web monitoring processing merged. I haven't actually deployed it yet, but once that PR that I put up yesterday night is in, then my plan is to deploy that on Google Cloud, definitely by this weekend. So you have a new differ, we'll merge it into that. And once you start to put up some filtration code or some pre-filtering code, we'll work together to figure out how that fits into this process. But once, right now it's kind of a one-step thing, right? Like all the DB can ask for right now is a raw diff. Once the DB starts ingesting annotations generated by our automated processes, then we're going to start to need, A triggers B, triggers C, triggers D, and now you're into an actual pipelining framework. And we'll have to have a discussion probably with the broader community about what technology we want to use for that. Early on, there was a contributor named Alethea, I think, who I haven't heard from in more than 2 months or so, but she suggested Celery might be good for this, which is a Python tool. There are others. I have to evaluate which is the best. If anybody is comfortable with one or the other, that would tilt us. But I think for sort of an initial step of how do we get this thing deployed, we'll just do something simple inside the web monitoring processing repo in the form of, wrapped in a web server and deploy it on Google Cloud. And then Rob's app needs a very simple line of configuration that basically tells it anytime someone asks for this kind of diff, a diff with this name, then go to the Google Cloud source to get it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and just a small thing. So I probably should have looked better, but so after, getting the versions and all, what is the format in which it's just stores in the cloud, like a relational database or something else, or is it just
the version content itself, like the actual page, or the snapshot?
The snapshots.
The snapshots. Any place that we trust it will stay. So if it's IA, the web monitoring DB database just stores a direct link to that snapshot. If it's versionista, then the web monitoring DB actually downloads that content through a separate script that downloads it locally into stuff that we control. And then the link that Web Monitoring DB stores is a local link to us. So the overriding theme is someplace where we know it'll still be there. Versionista, we don't really trust to maintain it forever, but Internet Archive, we do. So it's a mix of internal and external. Yeah.
My question was more, towards like Versionista, because that is the primary source we're using right now, right?
Right. So Versionista content is all downloaded into an S3 bucket that Rob is personally paying for. The links to those S3 buckets are what are stored in the Web Monitoring DB.
Okay.
That's what you're wondering. Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah. Any questions? Anything else to discuss from your end?
Are you feeling blocked on anything? I know like the sort of the lag and the plumbing that we're trying to build is getting in your way, and I think we have a pretty good plan from this call of how to be able to experiment sort of independently from that. But is there anything that you're feeling blocked by that we can prioritize?
I'm not feeling blocked by anything as such, but yeah, I did feel a lag. I mean, I've mentioned it to you, and I guess with the addition of new issues and sort of timelines, that should reduce by a considerable bit, and we should probably be up to speed again. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but yeah, that's really helpful, and I think it's gonna help both me and Harsh sort of go forward at the right pace.
Okay, good.
So, okay. Were we supposed to take notes for this meeting? I just remembered after so many other calls.
I took very poor notes.
It has been recorded.
But it's recorded.
So let's find it.
Cool.
I'm sorry, did I miss something?
No, not at all. She was just saying it has been recorded.
So yeah, we can probably add notes later, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one thing that I'm just noticing and looking at the issues, I mean, that link that I put in the chat shows you by label, Janek, which ones are assigned to this project. So you can filter by those to easily see, and by milestone to see which ones you should work on now in terms of priorities. But within a particular milestone, it isn't clear which issue is a priority. So I think that'll probably be clear based on conversations we're having, but if at any point a list of issues, it isn't clear, we could number them or come up with some other system if that isn't straightforward.
Right.
Yeah, I probably could just add a number in the description itself to sort of prioritize it. I guess that should work.
Right. Also, if I probably should have said before I assigned something to you, I usually use assign to mean nobody else do this. I've got it or he's got it or whatever. It's generally a way to say someone's working on this. It's not necessarily you must do this whether or not you find it interesting. So if something is assigned to you and you're like, I don't know about this, like that's fine.
No, I'm actually glad something was assigned to me, and I like taking on work, and this should be done by next week, or probably if I speed up from this weekend. Let's see.
Cool. Well, at least we'll learn something, whether or not it works, right? That's where we're at.
Okay. So should we end this call here? It's just awkward at the end of calls. I don't know how to.
Perfect. Thank you for getting up so early, Janek. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Ciao.
Good to see you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.